Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. A couple of years ago, I found myself in a job interview, facing the hiring manager's probing question, "What do you consider the greatest accomplishment of your career?" This gave me pause, considering I've been in the same field for over 2 decades. I let my mind wander back through the years. Sarah, the nurse manager. Tom, the program manager. Dr. Lisa, the clinical director. Yes, I had 3 bosses. I joined the unit as an experienced, somewhat cynical, RN in 2021, quickly realizing that most of my colleagues were incredibly young and green. For many, this was their first real job post-graduation. They assumed all the bizarre occurrences were just par for the course in any workplace. Sarah had imposed a rule that no one was allowed to file incident reports for medication errors or safety issues because it makes me look bad in safety meetings. "But isn't that against protocol?" I asked her one day. She glared at me. "Are you questioning my methods?" I backed off, but my unease grew. Non-clinical staff were permitted to administer medications. Schedules changed without warning. Moreover, the department was easily the most toxic I've ever worked in, with various cliques constantly at each other's throats. "Did you hear what Jessica said about Mark?" I overheard one day in the break room. "No. What?" "She said he's not cut out for this job. Can you believe it?" I sighed, realizing how deep the animosity ran. The troubles began one day in early 2022 when I opened my email to find a message from Sarah. It stated curtly that I was being investigated for an incident on the unit, that I was to meet with HR to discuss it and face possible disciplinary action. I was not to discuss the incident with anyone. No date was given, no medical record number, no indication of what the issue could be. I replied, "I'll need more information before I can attend any meeting. I'll also be speaking with my union rep." Sarah's response was terse. "That won't be necessary. Attend the meeting as instructed." I declined. Soon, I began receiving emails almost daily, each more threatening than the last. I printed them all, contacted my cousin, the employment attorney, tried not to start shaking whenever I had to check my email. I was keenly aware that this is intimidation 101, but it's remarkably effective even when you know that. Because I'm not one to follow arbitrary directions, I soon found myself discussing this in the break room. Before I knew it, 3 other women had approached me, all having received the same email on the same day. Comparison showed the emails being sent about a minute apart. We didn't work the same shifts or even the same days. "This can't be a coincidence," said Anna, one of the nurses. "Definitely not," I agreed. "We need to stick together on this." We agreed to call in the union rep and refused to meet with HR. Sarah continued to escalate, including cornering us in the hallway, stepping in chest to chest, and trying to stare us down. She was surprisingly intimidating for her small stature. Before long, we were speaking to more and more women, and it came to light that Sarah had a habit of targeting them with this exact email, followed by others that were more and more threatening until the person would finally meet with HR, get written up for something vague, and then be forced to sign a non-disclosure/no retaliation agreement. "I can't believe I fell for it," one nurse confided in me, tears in her eyes. "I was so scared of losing my job." "It's not your fault," I assured her. "But we're going to put a stop to this." We began to plot. We had limited time, and our company has a long and unglamorous history of protecting people like Sarah. Before long, the entire team was united against the common enemy. LGBTQ+ staff wrote up statements, backed with witnesses, of grossly homophobic comments, often in the presence of patients. Staff who were immigrants made statements about racial slurs. A particularly meticulous staff member had been compiling a dossier on every perceived policy violation and wrongdoing on Sarah's part since her hiring date, and he prepped it for presentation to HR. The night shift, all big, burly men, said, "Obviously Sarah isn't trying to flex on us, but we want to help." So they spent a couple nights cruising Sarah's social media posts and capturing screenshots of homo, trans, xenophobic, and misogynistic content. Worried that they hadn't done enough, the night staff paid for a cheap background check and hit the jackpot. DUI, failure to appear, hit and run, domestic violence, assault with a deadly weapon. "Did the company not do a background check?" one of them asked incredulously. "Apparently not," I replied, shaking my head in disbelief. Finally, 2 women came forward with complaints of sexual harassment. One incident had even occurred in the presence of the assistant manager, and one was documented in an email. We were ready. We flooded HR with meeting requests, and our union rep coordinated the assault so that on Monday we met for simple harassment and intimidation. I met first, and HR seemed unimpressed by my complaint. "Is that all you have?" the HR representative asked, looking bored. "Oh, just wait," I replied cryptically. Tuesday, all LGBTQ plus staff and those subjected to racial slurs made their formal complaints. They said that the HR lady looked tired. Wednesday started with the background check, moved into the minutiae of policy violations, and culminated with well-documented quid pro quo sexual harassment. The union rep informed HR that the union's attorney was eager to know how to proceed. HR assured her that would not be necessary. That evening, Sarah posted a sign on her office door saying she would be away for a few days and to contact Tom or Dr. Lisa if we needed anything. The night shift reported that over the weekend, housekeeping came and removed everything from her office except her name tag, which the night staff took as a trophy. On Monday at shift change, the CNO, COO, and HR met with the team and informed us that effective immediately, Sarah was no longer employed by the hospital. We all sat silently and politely until they exited the unit, when a loud and spontaneous cheer went up. People were hugging each other and cry-laughing. High fives all around. "We did it!" Anna exclaimed, hugging me tightly. "Together," I reminded her. "We did it together." Aftermath. To the best of my knowledge, Sarah never worked as an RN again. Frankly, I don't care. Tom was fired 3 days later for having been aware of all that was going on and turning a blind eye, and because apparently he'd been touching women on the unit for a couple of years. I hadn't been aware of that, but it came out in the HR meetings. Dr. Lisa was also fired for sexual harassment. The unit hired an old manager of mine who had a long and well-documented history of, you guessed it, sexual harassment. I quit within days of him being offered the job. The department's foray into getting along crumbled. Most of the staff have moved on to other jobs where they seem much happier. What do you consider the greatest accomplishment of your career? I sat up straight, smiled, and said, I took a very fractured team and brought them together to achieve a common goal. I like to think I'm really good at team building. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be in a situation where I'd have to prove I own a public park. But here we are. It all started on a sunny Saturday afternoon when I took my 7-year-old son, Tommy, to the local park. We live in a small suburb where everyone pretty much knows everyone, or so I thought. Tommy was excited to try out his new soccer ball, and I was looking forward to some fresh air after being cooped up all week with work. The park isn't anything fancy, just a decent-sized grassy area with a small playground, a few benches, and some trees for shade. It's been a community fixture for as long as I can remember. We'd been there for about 20 minutes, kicking the ball around, when this woman marched up to us. She looked to be in her mid-40s with that classic, "Can I speak to the manager?" haircut and an expression that could curdle milk. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "but you need to leave immediately." I was caught off guard. "I'm sorry, what?" She huffed, clearly annoyed at having to repeat herself. "I said you need to leave. This park is for residents only." I looked around, confused. There were no signs indicating the park was private or restricted. "Ma'am, this is a public park. We live just down the street." Her eyes narrowed. "I've never seen you before. I'm on the neighborhood watch, and I know every family in this area. You don't belong here." Now, I'll admit, I'm not the most social guy. I work from home and tend to keep to myself, but this was ridiculous. "Look, I don't know who you are, but we have every right to be here. Come on, Tommy, let's move to the other side of the park." I tried to guide Tommy away, but this woman, let's call her Karen because that's exactly who she was, stepped in front of us. "I won't tell you again. Leave now or I'm calling the police." Tommy looked up at me, confusion and worry in his eyes. "Dad, did we do something wrong?" "No, buddy," I reassured him. "We didn't do anything wrong. This lady is just confused." Karen whipped out her phone. "That's it. I'm calling the cops. You've been warned." I couldn't believe what was happening. "Go ahead," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I'd love to hear you explain to them why you're harassing people in a public park." While Karen dramatically dialed cop, I took Tommy over to a bench and tried to explain the situation as best I could. He was upset and didn't understand why we couldn't just play soccer. I didn't have a good answer for him. About 15 minutes later, a police car pulled up. Karen immediately rushed over, gesticulating wildly. I could hear snippets of her conversation, something about suspicious characters and trespassing. The officer listened patiently, then walked over to us. "Good afternoon, sir," he said politely. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" I nodded, still bewildered by the whole situation. "Of course, officer." He glanced at Tommy, who was clutching his soccer ball like a lifeline. "Ma'am over there says you're trespassing. Can I see some ID?" I pulled out my driver's license and handed it over. The officer looked at it, then at Karen, who was hovering nearby with a smug expression. "Sir, this address is just down the street. You live in the neighborhood?" "Yes, officer. We've been here for about 5 years now." Karen interjected. That's impossible. I know everyone in this neighborhood, and I've never seen them before. The officer held up a hand to quiet her. Ma'am, please, I'm handling this. He turned back to me. Sir, are you aware of any restrictions on using this park? I shook my head. No, sir. It's always been a public park as far as I know. There are no signs saying otherwise. The officer nodded, then walked around the park, confirming the lack of any restrictive signage. When he came back, Karen was practically vibrating with indignation. Officer, I demand you remove these people immediately. They don't belong here. The officer sighed. Ma'am, there's no evidence that this is a private park. These folks live in the neighborhood and have every right to be here. I'm afraid there's nothing I can do. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. This is outrageous! I'm going to file a complaint. I'll take this to the city council. As Karen stormed off, the officer turned to me with an apologetic look. I'm sorry about this, sir. You're free to enjoy the park. Have a good day. I thanked him, relieved that the ordeal was over. Or so I thought. Over the next week, Karen seemed to make it her personal mission to make our lives miserable. Every time Tommy and I went to the park, she was there, watching us like a hawk. She'd mutter under her breath, take pictures with her phone, and occasionally yell at other park goers to watch out for the suspicious characters. It was getting ridiculous. Tommy was stressed and didn't want to go to the park anymore. I was frustrated and angry. Something had to give. That's when I remembered something my grandfather had told me years ago when he gifted us the house. He'd mentioned something about the park, but I'd been so overwhelmed with the house itself that I hadn't paid much attention. I decided to dig through the old documents in our attic. After a few hours of searching, I found what I was looking for, a dusty folder filled with legal documents. As I read through them, my jaw dropped. It turned out that my grandfather had actually donated the land for the park to the city decades ago with one condition. It would remain a public park for all to enjoy. Armed with this knowledge, I made copies of the documents and headed to the city clerk's office. After explaining the situation, they confirmed that the documents were legitimate and still binding. They even gave me an official letter stating the park's status and my family's historical connection to it. The next day, I took Tommy to the park, documents in hand. Sure enough, Karen was there, phone at the ready. As soon as she saw us, she started toward us, but I held up a hand to stop her. Before you start, Karen, I have something to show you, I said, pulling out the documents and the letter from the city. This park? It was donated to the city by my grandfather. It's a public park, and it always will be. Here's an official letter from the city confirming it. Karen snatched the papers from my hand, her eyes darting back and forth as she read. Her face went from red to white to an interesting shade of purple. This can't be right, she sputtered. Oh, it's right, I said, trying not to sound too smug. So, not only do I have every right to be here, but I could technically ask you to leave if I wanted to, but I won't, because that's not what this park is about. It's for everyone to enjoy. Karen stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, she shoved the papers back at me and stormed off without another word. Word spread quickly in our small community. Over the next few days, neighbors I'd never spoken to before came up to introduce themselves, often with a knowing smile and a, "So you're the one who put Karen in her place." It was a bit overwhelming, but nice to finally feel like part of the community. The best part, though, was seeing Tommy relaxed and happy in the park again. We even organized a neighborhood soccer game, and to everyone's surprise, Karen showed up. She didn't say much, but she sat on a bench and watched. By the end of the game, she was cheering along with everyone else. As we were packing up to leave, Karen approached me. She looked uncomfortable but determined. I owe you an apology, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I was out of line. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I was just being a bully. I'm sorry. I was taken aback, but I appreciated her honesty. Thank you, Karen. That means a lot. She nodded, then looked at Tommy. I'm sorry to you too, young man. How about I bring some orange slices for the next game? Tommy's face lit up. That would be awesome! As we walked home, Tommy looked up at me. Dad, is Karen our friend now? I chuckled. Well, buddy, I think she's trying to be, and you know what? That's what this park is all about, bringing people together. From that day on, things changed in our little community. The park became a real gathering place, with regular events and games. Karen, to everyone's surprise, became one of the most active volunteers, organizing picnics and cleanup days. As for me, well, I learned a valuable lesson about the importance of community and standing up for what's right. And every time I see kids playing in the park, I think of my grandfather and smile, knowing his legacy lives on. It just goes to show, sometimes the best way to deal with a Karen isn't to fight fire with fire, but to douse the flames with kindness and facts. And who knows? You might just turn an enemy into a friend. The next one is a petty revenge story. My ex-roommate moved out almost a month ago. She was terrible to me, didn't take responsibility for herself or her dog, didn't clean up, and treated me and my stuff badly. When she left the room she had in an awful state. I took over the apartment myself and was waiting for her to give me back the keys she had. When she didn't come back for a few hours after leaving, she was leaving randomly throughout the day, I messaged her asking where she was. She told me that she was done, and she gave the keys to management earlier. When I told her she was supposed to give them to me as I was keeping the apartment, it wasn't a total move out. She basically told me to deal with it and to stop harassing her. The annoying thing about it was that the office is only open during working hours and I obviously have a job. I had to go out of my way to go and get the keys when I shouldn't have had to. Anyways, to the actual petty revenge. 2 letters for her had shown up since she moved out, which most likely include checks and important information from the government. Since she didn't have the decency to just give me the keys and not make my life easier, plus how awful of a person and roommate she was, I'm not going to go out of my way to help her. I went to the post office, stood in line for a while, and returned the mail via return to sender because she doesn't live at my address anymore. She'll still get her mail with her checks and information, but it'll take a lot longer. She'll just have to deal with it, I guess. Maybe she should talk to the post office if she wants the mail back. Yes, that's a reference of what she said to me, lol. Fun little edit / update and more revenge. I sent out the damage deposit to her. She isn't getting anything back. It was between us. And CC'd the site manager of our apartment. She responded with a really weak comment, basically saying I'm petty. Then she asked for the utilities information from the past 2 months. I am not going to give it to her since I did not charge her for it. She wants the information to send to her social worker to get reimbursed for the utilities. I plan on restating that yes, she caused this on her own, and her submitting a claim for utilities would be fraudulent as she wasn't charged for them. If she wants the utility statements, she can try and get them herself. I refuse to help her get money she isn't owed. Best. My favorite sign-off. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Many years ago, I did all kinds of admin work at an oil terminal. One of my jobs was to take care of the documents after vessels had been loaded. Bills of lading would usually have to be couriered to a bank, so I'd take care of that as well. Now, I said bills of lading had to be couriered to a bank, but that's not entirely true. Every time a vessel would come to load, we'd receive a document distribution matrix. Originals of document X to be sent to A, copies to B, C, and D. Originals of document Y to be sent to B, well, you get the gist. I would usually completely ignore that matrix. I knew exactly who needed what, and I knew that the bank only cared about the BSL, so I'd just send them those, and that was never a problem. That is, until someone new started at said bank and would complain about missing documents. Next time, I added some more documents that I reckoned might be vaguely relevant, but again, they complained about missing documents. I'm still not sure why that was, only the BL was relevant to them. But the next time a vessel had loaded, I was very happy to give them exactly what they wanted. The document distribution matrix was probably once drafted by someone who didn't know what they were doing, then ignored by everyone, so it never became a problem. In this case, however, I was going to need a bigger envelope. I followed the matrix to the letter. 1 original plus 4 copies? You got it. I was really happy because I'd spotted the fatal flaw. Some background first. For every chemical product, there is a Material Safety Data Sheet, MSDS. They contain all sorts of information regarding safety of the product, and over time they've become monstrosities. So here's what made me so happy. The matrix also mentioned 1 original and 4 copies of the MSDS, which was a 250-plus page document. There is absolutely no reason why the bank would need even 1 copy of the MSDS, but it was in the matrix, and I'd been told to follow the matrix. So I did. I printed it 5 times, copied all other documents 4 times, and ended up with a stack of over 1.500 pages. Here's where my sadism kicked in. The 3 original bills of lading, the only documents I knew the bank actually needed, went randomly into that stack. The person on the other side would have to go through that entire stack to find those 3 pieces of paper they really needed. I heard nothing from them. The next time I had to send documents to the bank again, I reverted to what I'd always sent to them. Again, silence. That's when I knew I'd won. From then on, all was back to normal. The next one is an entitled people's story. This story happened a couple of years ago, but I remembered it recently while reading other people's stories, and had to share it. I used to work at a McDonald's to support myself as I finished high school, and would usually be put on drive-thru duty. One time, towards the end of the closing shift, this middle-aged man came through and just ordered a hot fudge sundae. Let's call him Kevin. I told him his total, and he drove towards the window and paid. He seemed a little upset, but besides that, everything was normal so far. Little did I know what was in store. There were only a couple of other people working the closing shift, so I was also in charge of making drinks and ice cream-related items, including the sundaes. So I walked over to the sundae station, made his sundae with the standard amount of ice cream, and topped it with hot fudge. For context, every sundae got exactly 1 pump of hot fudge, so the one I made had the same amount of hot fudge as any other one. I took this over to the window, grabbed a spoon, and went to hand Kevin his sundae. Before I could, he stopped me, said, "Wait, are you serious?" and gave me a look like I had just spat in his food or something. I replied, "I'm sorry. What's wrong?" And without missing a beat, he said, "That's way too much hot fudge. You expect me to eat that?" I just wanted to get him out of the drive-thru, so I said, "I'm sorry, that's the standard amount for our sundaes. If you want, I can make you a new one with half the normal amount of fudge." He said that's what he wanted, so I went back over and passed my elderly co-worker who had worked there longer than me. Let's call her Laura. Laura was the sweetest person ever and wanted to know what was going on. So I explained the situation to her, and she offered to take the sundae off my hands while I made the new one and dealt with the customer. The owner would always let us eat any food that couldn't be served, and I don't eat dairy, so this wasn't abnormal. I then returned to the window with a sundae that had half the fudge on it when Kevin exclaimed, "What's this? There's hardly any fudge on that thing." He kept yelling about how ridiculous my service was, but when I got a chance I simply replied, "This is half the amount of fudge that was on the first sundae. I can get you a side of hot fudge if you would like." He hesitantly said, "Okay," and I closed the window. I'd had a long day, so I was starting to tear up at this point. I went back to the sundae station, and Laura asked why he wasn't happy. I told her I was getting him a side of hot fudge, but wasn't sure how to do that, since we didn't have containers for that. This is when Laura becomes the hero of the story. She told me she'd handle it, and grabbed the bottom half of a 2-piece sundae container, filled it with 1 pump of fudge, and went over to the window. I couldn't hear what he was saying, as I was just standing by the sundae station trying to calm down, but Laura later told me he was going on and on about how ridiculous it was that there wasn't a lid for the hot fudge container. She just replied, "Leave," to everything he said. Finally he said, "I better not spill this or I'm coming right back here," to which she replied, "Okay, just go." And he finally drove off, never to be seen again. Laura came over and reassured me that I handled the situation well. I left that night with 2 large fries that we hadn't sold, which helped cheer me up a bit. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.